The words landed like a slap across the chamber. Barron Trump leaned into the microphone, his voice carrying the sharpness of privilege wrapped in a smirk, and declared that Representative Jasmine Crockett was unfit. The insult sliced through, the air drawing gasps from some, knowing chuckles from others, and the scratching frenzy of reporters' pens desperate to record the moment. For a heartbeat, silence followed. It was the kind of silence that hums with electricity. It's the kind that makes people lean forward because they know something unforgettable is about to happen. Cameras zoomed in, phones lit up. Hashtag was already forming in the digital ether, spreading across social media like wildfire before the words had even stopped echoing in the chamber. But while the world tilted toward the outburst, Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She sat steady, her eyes narrowing just enough to communicate that she had heard him, absorbed the venom, and refused to dignify it with immediate outrage. Her stillness was not weakness. It was a gathering storm. Every detail of her expression told a story. A woman who had been underestimated before, public servant who had weathered worse insults. Someone who understood that the real response is not in the volume of your voice, but in the weight of your truth. Barron's posture radiated confidence, the easy arrogance of someone raised to believe that a single insult could define another person's worth. He expected her to recoil, to fumble, to defend herself with nervous words. He expected validation. What he did not expect was silence sharpened into steel. Around the room, allies shifted uncomfortably. Opponents smirked, certain the blow had landed. The tension became unbearable, a taut string ready to snap. And as Crockett finally raised her eyes from the table and locked them on her accuser, there was no mistaking what came next. Her gaze didn't shout. It promised a quiet storm brewing behind calm eyes. Certainty that the next move would not simply answer the insult, it would redefine the entire exchange. And in that chamber, where arrogance believed it had won, with a single word, nobody, not even Barron himself, was prepared for what she revealed next. To the casual observer, Barron Trump's insult might have sounded like another sharp-edged barb tossed in the theater of politics, here today and forgotten tomorrow. But beneath the surface, this clash carried a weight far greater than the words themselves. It wasn't just about one young man sneering across the aisle. It was about two visions of America colliding in real time. On one side, the scion of a dynasty, the embodiment of inherited privilege, a name etched into towers and headlines, wielding insult as if it were authority. On the other, Representative Jasmine Crockett, a black congresswoman whose life was defined not by what she inherited, but by what she built. Crockett's journey was one of service and struggle, a lawyer, an advocate, a fighter for the underrepresented. Her seat in Congress wasn't purchased by wealth or granted by name recognition. It was earned step by step, in courtrooms and communities where the people she served saw themselves reflected in her. For Barron, who had never stood in those trenches, it was easy to dismiss her as unfit. For Crockett, those words echoed centuries of dismissal, words hurled at those who didn't look the part, who didn't fit the mold, who were told they were less than because of their gender, their race, their background. That is why the chamber seemed to vibrate when the insult dropped. It wasn't just a remark, it was a collision of history, generational clash between arrogance that believes power is birthright and resilience that proves leadership is earned. Every eye in the room recognized it, even if they wouldn't admit it aloud. The insult carried the weight of every worker, every immigrant, every person told they did not belong in rooms of power. And Crockett's silence, her refusal to flinch, carried the dignity of those same people. Outside the chamber, the nation was watching. Social media clipped the moment and spread it like wildfire. Progressive commentators asked how long America would keep mistaking wealth for wisdom. Others, aligned with Barron, cheered the jab, satisfied to see another Trump take the stage as an attack dog. But everyone, friend or foe, understood the stakes were shifting. This wasn't a casual exchange. It was a confrontation that could define reputations, careers, even narratives about who deserves to shape the country's future. And beneath the noise, the deeper truth pulsed. This was never just about two names sparring. It was about who America deems worthy of power. Is it the heir to privilege? Who can sling insults without consequence? Or the servant leader, whose legitimacy is rooted in the people who elected her, in the communities she defended, in the sacrifices that carried her into those halls. In that moment, Barron's smirk became more than a smirk. It became a symbol, a dare to history. And Crockett's steady gaze became an answer, an unspoken promise that arrogance would not have the final word. The chamber sat on edge. The world leaned in, and every second of silence grew heavier than the last. Because what would happen next would not be contained to those four walls. It would ripple outward, through headlines, through screens, through the very bloodstream of the nation. But the insult was only the spark. What followed would ignite a national firestorm. From his earliest days, Barron Trump lived in a world most of America only sees on screens. Born into the Trump dynasty in March 2006, he was the youngest scion of a brand built on real estate towers, gilded penthouses, and relentless media spectacle. Raised in the luminous heights of Trump Tower, he inhabited an entire floor of opulent seclusion luxury that whispered entitlement and privilege that spoke volumes before he ever spoke a word. Wikipedia co-operative. Food magazine Barron's life was orchestrated for protection. Not a showman like his older siblings, he was deliberately kept out of the political spotlight, his presence muted and managed. While Donald and Melania moved through campaign rallies and inaugural ceremonies, Barron was shielded, schooled privately. In New York, then Maryland, always under layers of secrecy and security. It wasn't innocence. It was InsurancePeople.com business insiders. Barron grew. So did whispers of his adulthood ambitions. He entered New York University's Stern School of Business, commuting from Trump Tower, under the watch of Secret Service. Agents not melding into student life, but protected from it. The Sun Vanity Fair during rare moments in public view, his father's rallies or curated appearances, he exuded confidence. But always with the cushion of safety and the shield of name recognition, this life of comfort shaped attitudes. In his world, authority was inherited, not earned. Insults became weapons, flung without risk against those who didn't share his insulated upbringing, while opponents had to stand for their words. Barron's world offered hallways lined with handlers, and media trainers' insults could hang in the air, unattended, unchallenged. Behind his smooth public veneer, there lay contradictions. He became a student at elite institutions, yet lived as if the world should orbit around him. He preached strength through family legacy, but abstained from proving himself through public debate or policy. His father's playbook mock, diminish, dominate, was his inheritance, even if he rarely wielded it in his own right. History has taught us that when power is untested, arrogance grows unchecked. The Trump family often dismissed critics with bombast and spectacle public figures who struck first with sound bites, not substance. Barron inherited this legacy, the confidence that comes from never having to answer for actions, only to posture. Wikipedia, but every inheritance lays its trap. The shield of privilege only feels invincible until someone refuses to be silenced. The smirk born of security becomes brittle. When met with truth presented without fear, insult intended as dominance can fracture that fragile pedestal. In that moment, standing across from Jasmine Crockett, the walls around Barron's confidence began to crack. His words meant to belittle, to assert unchallengeable power, were not the closing act. They were the prelude. In targeting her, he underestimated what he had never learned to face, someone whose claim to authority came not from name or fortune, but from labor, empathy, and justice. His arrogance thought itself untouchable. But arrogance built on entitlement is brittle. Words meant to wound became self-inflicted fractures, because in cloaking himself with inheritance, Barron had neglected the one truth that matters above all. Character cannot be bought. His words were meant to belittle instead. He set the stage for his undoing. Jasmine Crockett did not rise to power on the back of wealth or family inheritance. She did not grow up in penthouses or private schools where success was guaranteed by last name alone. Her path was carved from grit, from long nights of study, from courtrooms where the stakes weren't abstract debates but the lives and freedoms of ordinary people. To understand why Barron Trump's insult cut so shallowly, and why her response would cut so deeply, you have to know where she came from. Born in St. Louis, Missouri, Jasmine Crockett grew up in the Midwest with a first-hand view of what it meant to work hard for every step forward. She wasn't shielded from struggle. She was shaped by it. From a young age, she learned to speak up against injustice, to fight not just for herself, but for others who didn't have the same platform or the same voice. Where some children were groomed for business dynasties, Jasmine was raised with the conviction that real service was the highest calling. That conviction drove her to pursue law. She graduated from law school with a determination that wasn't about prestige, but about purpose. She could have taken the comfortable path, securing lucrative jobs in corporate firms or chasing titles for recognition's sake. Instead, she went into criminal defense, fighting for the marginalized and overlooked. Day after day, she walked into courtrooms where people's futures hinged on whether someone cared enough to give them a fair chance. She became known for defending the voiceless, for standing firm even when the odds were stacked high against her. Those years forged resilience. She learned to stand calmly in hostile rooms. She learned to confront prosecutors and judges with sharp logic and steady resolve. She learned that being underestimated could be a weapon. Because while others dismissed her, she sharpened her skills until her words carried undeniable weight. That's why, long before she set foot in Congress, Jasmine Crockett had already built a reputation, a fighter who did not bend, a voice that did not waver. When protests swept the nation after George Floyd's murder, Crockett was not watching from the sidelines. She was in the streets, representing activists, defending the principle that Black lives mattered in courtrooms where those words were not always welcome. While others played politics with justice, she lived it. Her activism was not performative. It was protective, and it earned her the trust of communities who saw her as more than a politician. She was one of them, battle-scarred, battle-tested, unafraid. That trust carried her into the Texas House of Representatives, and later to Congress. Each election was not a coronation but a hard-fought victory, secured one conversation at a time with the very people Barron Trump and his ilk so often ignore. In Congress, Crockett's voice has been unapologetic. She's challenged corruption, fought for equity, and refused to be silenced in committee rooms where women especially. Black women are too often talked over or dismissed. To her constituents, she became a symbol, proof that dignity and determination could take a person further than arrogance ever could. And so, when Barron labeled her unfit, he was unknowingly calling into question the countless hours she spent in courtrooms defending rights, protests where she stood shoulder to shoulder with her people, the legislative battles she waged not for herself but for those who entrusted her with their futures. To call her unfit was not just an insult. To her, it was an insult to everyone she represented. Everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, but Crockett was not about to respond with the same shallow venom. She didn't need to, because she had something Barron Trump never expected. Proof. In her folder sat a recording, a piece of history, not gossip. A voice, not an echo. Something that would shift the balance of the room with the press of a button. It wasn't theatrics. It was truth, waiting for the right moment. And when the insult fell, that moment arrived. For all his bravado, Barron had underestimated her background, her preparation, her ability to fight not just with words but with facts. Where he relied on arrogance, she relied on evidence. Where he wielded insult, she wielded truth. And when the time came to strike, she didn't need to raise her voice or trade barbs. She only needed to press play. And so, when she finally pressed play, it wasn't just audio, it was history coming back to haunt him. The first insult had been sharp enough to jolt the chamber, but Barron wasn't finished. Emboldened by the laughter of a few allies behind him, he leaned forward again, voice dripping with the kind of casual cruelty that only comes from someone who has never had to fight for his place in a room. Unfit, he repeated, stretching the word as if savoring it. Unfit to lead. Unfit to speak for America. Each repetition landed like a hammer blow, not because of its substance, it had none, but because of its audacity. The room tensed. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing these lines would headline their stories before the sun had set. Cameras zoomed closer, catching every flicker of expression, every twitch and posture. Members of Congress shifted in their seats, some grinning with anticipation, others tightening their jaws in frustration. This was no longer just an insult. It was a test. And Jasmine Crockett passed that test with the kind of calm that unnerves bullies. She didn't snap back, didn't hurl her own insult across the table. Instead, she adjusted her microphone, sat a little straighter, and let the silence speak for her. Silence is dangerous, invites reflection. It forces the audience to notice what arrogance tries to hide. Barron began to fidget, tapping a pen against the table, his smirk faltering as he realized the silence was not submission. It was strategy. When Crockett finally did speak, her voice was measured, each word chosen like a surgeon's scalpel. "Mr. Trump," she said, her tone unshaken, "what you call unfit is often what history calls resilient." A murmur swept through the chamber. The contrast between his sneer and her composure couldn't have been sharper. He leaned forward again, voice raised, hoping to drown her out. "You think people want this representing them?" he fired back, motioning dismissively toward her. "People are tired of incompetence. They want strength." Crockett didn't flinch, her eyes fixed on him, unwavering. "Strength?" she replied softly, almost forcing him to strain to hear. "Strength is not inherited, Mr. Trump. Strength is earned." The room inhaled sharply. For a moment, it was unclear whether the gasp came from the audience or from Barron himself. He tried again, piling insult upon insult, doubling down as if volume could compensate for substance. "You're a disgrace to this office," he snapped. "You don't belong here. Everyone knows it." His voice cracked just slightly at the end, a fissure in the armor. Crockett leaned back,
allowing
his words to hang in the air, heavy with arrogance but hollow in meaning. She didn't rush to respond. She let the silence expand again, daring everyone in the chamber to ask themselves which voice sounded like leadership and which sounded like petulance. Reporters caught every detail: Barron's growing agitation, his flushed face, his restless hands, Crockett's steady poise, her patience, her refusal to descend into the mud. On social media, live updates described the exchange as a battle of composure versus chaos. By now, even Barron's allies shifted uneasily. Insults lose their sting when they become predictable, when the repetition reveals insecurity rather than authority. Each new jab seemed less like dominance and more like desperation, and Crockett knew it. Her calm was not passive. It was deliberate. She was waiting for the precise moment to turn the tide. And then, just when the room thought the exchange might stretch endlessly, just when Barron seemed ready to hurl yet another insult, Crockett moved. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her folder. Papers shuffled, pens clattered, every head turned. The anticipation was unbearable. What was she doing? Her hand emerged, holding a small device. She placed it gently on the desk in front of her, her eyes never leaving his. The air grew heavy. Reporters leaned so far forward they nearly toppled their chairs. And even Barron froze for the first time since he'd spoken. And then she reached into her folder, pulled out the device, and the room went silent. Crockett didn't rush. That was the key. Every second she delayed, the room's anticipation grew heavier, pressing down like a storm waiting to break. She rested her fingers on the small device, almost caressing it, her eyes never leaving Barron. He was smirking again, but this time, the grin looked forced, brittle at the edges. He tried to laugh, shifting in his chair as though to suggest indifference. But the restless tapping of his foot betrayed him. "Before I press this button," Crockett began, her voice calm, measured, "I want to remind everyone here why we're in this room. We are not here for insults. We're not here for dynasties or names or legacies. We're here to ask one question. Who has the integrity to serve the people of this country?" The words hung in the air, striking deeper than any insult could. Smirk faltered just slightly. A few murmurs ran through the audience. She continued. "Mr. Trump called me unfit," she said, her tone even sharper now, like tempered steel. "But fitness for leadership isn't determined by who shouts the loudest or who was born into the most powerful family. It's determined by character. Sometimes character is revealed when we think no one is listening." Her hand pressed play. The speakers crackled, and suddenly the room was filled with Barron Trump's own voice, not the polished sound bites. Not the scripted arrogance delivered for cameras, but something raw, unguarded. His voice was unmistakable. "You don't need brains to win." The recording began, the smug cadence dripping through every syllable. "Oh. Name. The Trump name. People don't care if you actually know what you're doing." The words sliced through the chamber like a blade. Gasp rippled across the room, sharp and immediate. Reporters' pens froze mid-sentence. Phones flew into the air, cameras locking onto Barron's face. His smirk evaporated in real time, replaced by a sudden pallor that drained the color from his cheeks. The recording continued. "Congress." His voice scoffed. "It's a stage. You just tear the other person down, make them look small. That's all it takes. Doesn't matter if they've worked, if they've served, if they actually care. Call them weak, call them unfit, and you win. Easy." The chamber exploded with whispers, the kind that swell into something uncontrollable. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared at Barron as if seeing him for the first time. The very insult he had hurled just moments before, unfit, was now revealed as nothing more than a cynical tactic. A borrowed trick from a dynasty built on mockery rather than merit. Crockett didn't move. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't even glance at the crowd. She simply sat still, eyes fixed on Barron, letting his own words hang in the air like a confession. "The recording wasn't finished. You think any of them belong here?" Barron's voice sneered. "Most of them are nobodies, just pretending. The only reason I belong is the last name. That's the ticket, that's the brand." This time the gasp was followed by a stunned silence, the kind that seemed to last forever, and then somewhere in the back, a single clap broke through. Slow, deliberate, heads turned. Then another joined in, and another, until the sound of applause rolled through the chamber. Not in celebration, but in recognition of the moment, the unmasking of arrogance. Barron's composure cracked visibly now. He tried to laugh again, but the sound caught in his throat. His lips trembled, his eyes darted nervously from side to side, searching for an ally, a lifeline, anything to break the tide turning against him. But there was no escape. The more he shifted in his seat, the more the cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of fear, every drop of sweat forming at his brow, and still Crockett said nothing. Her silence was devastating. The more she held it, the more powerful it became. The weight of restraint spoke louder than any speech could have. The recording rolled to its end with one final line. "They'll follow the name." Barron's voice echoed, arrogant and careless. "That's all that matters. It's not qualifications. Not service, just the name." Then silence. The applause had ended, replaced now by an eerie stillness. The room held its breath, waiting, wondering what would happen next. Every camera was locked onto Barron, whose face was now pale, drained of the bravado that had carried him into the room. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched, but there was no comeback ready. No insult left sharp enough to cut through what had just been revealed. Crockett leaned forward at last, her voice cutting through the silence with the precision of a blade. "You called me unfit," she said, her tone steady, unshaken. "Gosh. But I've worked for everything I have. I've stood for people who had no one else to stand for them. I've earned my place here. Can you say the same?" Her question lingered in the chamber like a challenge, daring him to respond, daring him to prove her wrong. But he couldn't. Every eye in the room had already seen the truth, heard the truth, felt the truth, and so she leaned back, hands folded, her expression calm, unflinching. She didn't need to say more. His own words had done the work for her. The audience knew it. The press knew it. And Barron knew it most of all. By the time the clip ended, the debate wasn't about whether Crockett was unfit. It was about whether Barron had just destroyed his own credibility. The clip hadn't even finished echoing through the chamber before it began its second life online. Within minutes, shaky cell phone videos of Jasmine Crockett's .com demolition of Barron Trump were uploaded to Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. What had started as a heated exchange in a debate hall became a cultural earthquake, spreading faster than any campaign speech ever could. On Twitter, hashtags materialized almost instantly. Hashtag unfit backfire. Hashtag Crockett mic drop. Hashtag name is not enough. By midnight, they weren't just trending nationally, they had gone global. Memes multiplied by the second, side-by-side clips of Barron calling Crockett unfit, next to his own recorded voice bragging that the Trump name was the only ticket. TikTok edits layered the audio over dramatic slow-motion cuts, turning his undoing into a viral spectacle that young voters replayed on loop. The internet turned Barron into a punchline. Fit check. Crockett Barron read one viral tweet. Another stitched Crockett's stare during the silence after the recording with captions reading, "This is the exact moment he knew it was over." Even late-night comedians didn't wait for their writers' rooms. They live-tweeted jokes in real time, turning the scandal into a cultural shorthand for hypocrisy. But if the internet was laughing, the commentary class was dead serious. On CNN, panelists replayed the recording frame by frame, analyzing the expression that flickered across Barron's face when his own words sealed his fate. MSNBC hosts praised Crockett's composure, describing her silence as the sharpest weapon in politics, dignity under fire. Even more conservative outlets struggled to spin the moment, some grudgingly admitting that Barron had handed his opponent a gift on a silver platter. And then came the political reactions. Within hours, fellow Democrats rallied behind Crockett. Statements poured in from colleagues, praising her poise and reinforcing her message. Service over arrogance. One congresswoman tweeted, "Jasmine showed America what leadership looks like, calm, prepared, and unshaken." Others shared clips of their own experiences of being dismissed or insulted in politics, framing the moment as bigger than one debate, as a turning point in a larger struggle for respect and recognition. Republicans, meanwhile, scrambled. Some tried to downplay the recording as taken out of context. Others avoided the subject altogether, pivoting to unrelated talking points. But the cracks were visible. Privately, strategists worried aloud that the clip could follow Barron for the rest of his career, branding him not as his father's heir, but as his own undoing. And then the endorsements began. Civil rights groups praised Crockett's resilience. Veteran organizations circulated the clip as an example of why service and sacrifice matter more than name and privilege. Even some independents who had been skeptical of Crockett admitted that her grace under pressure had impressed them. The shockwaves didn't stop with politics. College students recreated the moment in viral skits. High school debate teams played the clip as an example of composure under attack. Musicians sampled Barron's infamous line, "The name is the ticket," flipping it into remixes that mocked the very entitlement he had revealed. What Barron had meant as a weapon, the word unfit, had now become a boomerang, slamming back into him with devastating force. The internet, the media, even his own party couldn't contain the wildfire. And at the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't flood her socials with celebratory posts. Instead, she released a single, simple statement. "I have never needed a name. I've only needed my work, my word, and my will. That is what fitness for leadership looks like." The restraint made the moment even bigger. While Barron was mocked for arrogance, Crockett was elevated for humility. While he became a symbol of inherited entitlement, she became a symbol of earned dignity. It was a clash larger than two individuals. It was a generational conflict, the privileged inheritor versus the public servant. It was the question of what America values, legacy or labor, dynasty or democracy. And as the debate raged across television screens and phone feeds, one truth became impossible to deny. Crockett had not only survived the insult, she had turned it into a defining triumph. But the true meaning of this moment went beyond viral clips, hashtags, or memes. Beneath the noise, something deeper stirred. A question bigger than Barron or Crockett. A question about power, worth, and the future of America itself. Cliffhanger. Because in the end, this wasn't just about a debate stage, it was about the American spirit. And whether it still believed that character could triumph over privilege, when the debate dust settled, something remarkable became clear. Jasmine Crockett had not only answered an insult, she had rewritten its meaning. What began as a dismissive word, unfit, had been transformed into a lesson for the entire nation. Because arrogance, Crockett reminded the country, is not leadership. Titles are not strength. Names are not worth. True fitness for power is measured not by privilege, but by perseverance, not by mockery, but by the ability to rise above it. For Barron Trump, the moment had been meant to belittle. For Crockett, it became the stage on which she elevated something larger than herself. She did not raise her voice. She did not trade insult for insult. Instead, she held her ground with composure, and in doing so, she spoke for every underdog who has ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told they didn't belong. It was as if the silence after the recording carried a message beyond words, that dignity outlasts arrogance, that truth outshines mockery, that service endures long after inherited names fade. In the following days, Crockett was asked repeatedly how she had stayed so calm. Her answer was simple: because I've been called unfit before, and every time I've let my work prove otherwise. That response resonated. Teachers shared it with students. Parents repeated it to children. Workers carried it into their jobs. It became more than a soundbite. It became a mantra, and that was the deeper truth. Crockett hadn't defended just herself. She had defended everyone who had ever been underestimated. The single mother working 2 jobs who's told she never get ahead. The first-generation student who's told college isn't for them. The immigrant dismissed as an outsider. The worker told they'll never rise above their station. In that moment, she was more than a congresswoman. She was a mirror reflecting the resilience of countless Americans who have had to earn respect the hard way. Her triumph was not in humiliating Barron Trump, though the viral memes made it look that way. Her triumph was in showing that leadership is not about tearing others down, but about standing tall in the face of it. That arrogance may get attention, but dignity earns lasting respect. And so, the lesson lingered. Dynasties crumble, insults fade, but character endures. Crockett turned what could have been a fleeting exchange into a defining parable, the story of a woman who turned an attempt to silence her into a moment of voice for millions. For Barron, the insult disappeared into the noise of the internet, a clip to be replayed as mockery. But for Crockett, the silence she commanded became something immortal, an echo that reminded America of its best self. And as commentators, teachers, and ordinary citizens repeated her words, the moral became undeniable. Power without principle is hollow. Privilege without service is empty. But dignity, real dignity, echoes. In the end, Barron's insult vanished. But Crockett's dignity echoed across the nation. It began with an insult. Single word, unfit, hurled like a weapon meant to wound and diminish. Barron Trump thought he could define Jasmine Crockett with the arrogance of inherited power. But what followed was confrontation. Crockett stood her ground, calm, steady, unshaken. She knew the measure of a person was not in what others called them, but in how they answered. Then came the recording. A moment of truth that flipped the stage, exposing hypocrisy, stripping away privilege, and revealing that the real weakness was not in her, but in him. And finally, the downfall. Not with shouting, not with rage, but with silence. A silence that carried more weight than 1,000 insults. In that silence, dignity triumphed over arrogance. Barron tried to brand her unfit, but the truth proved otherwise. Jasmine Crockett showed that fitness for leadership is built on service, character, and resilience. And in doing so, she didn't just defend herself, she defended every underdog. Every voice dismissed, every dream deferred. This is bigger than one clash. It's about the America we choose to believe in, one where power doesn't come from privilege but from perseverance, and that's where you come in. If you believe arrogance should never triumph over dignity, if you believe service should outlast mockery, if you believe in the voices that refuse to be silenced, then join us. Subscribe, share this story, be part of the movement for truth, because insults fade, arrogance collapses, but dignity echoes forever.